morning, good afternoon, good evening to people around the world. This is your host, Martin Hubel, and I'm here with a special guest, namely myself today. I like to present, if people know. I've been doing it a long time, so I always seem to try to find a time slot for myself to be able to be part of the Db2Night show myself. So this year I came up with a brand new presentation. I thought I'd written my last one a couple of years ago on tuning and other things I've learned by doing a lot of tuning, but I've been doing some work with some startups, and I thought I'd put a few ideas together on that. But before we get into that, we'll do our normal housekeeping. Here's our social media page where we have a Twitter account, our LinkedIn group, and our replays are now available on YouTube. We've been saying that for a little while. That's our standard slide, along with our disclaimers. Everything's being recorded. Trademarks belong to the respective organizations, and all of that type of stuff. So we'll move on. And the quick announcements. Well, I've got myself still on there. I meant to take that off, but this is the final show of the year. And we also have, in 2 weeks' time, we'll have our last Z show of season 11. That's Dave Belke again, IBM Gold consultant and regular contributor to the Db2Night show. This time he's speaking on security, Db2 best practices, staying up with threats. And then, of course, we have our summer, which seems everything in Toronto is canceled. All of the music festivals, food festivals, exhibitions, fairs, everything is canceled. So we're all going to stay home, which gives you a whole bunch of time to watch all of the replays of the Db2Night show and all the other content you can find. As always, DBI software continues to be our founding software of the Db2Night show. We thank them for that. And should you feel that you want to watch their demo, it is available at a link, and there's a prize for watching it. So if you've got the time and you haven't seen it, watch that. Last show's winner was Kenneth Lee of JP Morgan, won an Amazon gift certificate. Congratulations, Kenneth. And we'll see at the end of today's show who the winner is for this week. Just a little bit more on DBI. Here's their main menu of their new version they're bringing out. It's got all of the information relating to best performing and worst performing transactions and SQL statements, and overall resource utilization. Great. Very informative screen, which leads you into another screen. Oh, I thought I had two there. I guess I just put the one in today. But our sponsors, again, are myself, Martin Hubel Consulting, and DBI Software. Oh, there's the other screen. I thought I got out of order again. And this is the transaction time, looking at execution times, looking at service level agreements that you define within the product to make sure that you are meeting those and report those easily to management. I thought I would put up Charlie, seeing as it's the end of the season, and Charlie's kind of winding down. He's an old dog now. He's now 15 years old. He lies around a lot more than he used to. He's sleeping a lot. He eats a lot. Apparently, older male dogs are known for chowing down as they get older. There's some nice shots of dear old Charlie doing his thing. I also put in a do-it-yourself flowchart. Found this lying around. I don't know if I've shown it before, but it's an engineering flowchart. If you're doing things at home, if it doesn't move, no. Should it? Yes, use your WD-40. And the other side, if it's moving and it's not supposed to, put duct tape on it. That'll get through many things around your house if you need to do them. All right, we'll carry on and do our polls now. It's a little funny having to do this myself. I feel I should be asking myself questions as I put these up. But here's our first question. I did manage to go through and update it today, saying which versions of Db2 LUW are you currently running. People are voting quickly. Thanks for that. close that. We'll share the results. Most of the audience is on 11.1. We've got people on 11.5, and we've got people on 10.5. Fortunately, no one on 10.1 or earlier. That's nice to see. Next one. So what commercial DBMSs are you running? Besides Db2 LUW. Being the Db2Night show, it's not surprising that most people are running Db2 on Z. Full collector series of responses there. Close that and share the results. It's 91% have Db2 on Z. And we have the usual suspects down below. Open source stuff is making its way into these shops these days. I changed this so you can answer all any or all of them, as opposed to the way I had it set up before, where you only got to choose one answer. You get to choose all of the products you have installed. And it looks like all of them are being used. That's interesting to see. Share that with you. MongoDB, MySQL, Postgres are leading the pack as per normal. This is kind of a carryover from our last Db2 LUW show, but I did want to put it in just to see where people are running Db2 LUW these days. Locally, container installs, cloud hosted, cloud managed, cloud pack for data. Got everybody votes on that. We'll share that along. Everybody likes to do things locally. I kind of fall into the same category. We do have some customers doing things like DR and that type of thing on cloud these days. 9% of the people are using cloud hosted, cloud managed. Interesting. And our last question before the presentation is, are you using DevOps or the levels of DevOps in your shop? This is relevant to our topic today. Close that and share the results. 20% are embracing Agile completely. The next one is 60% of people are now using Agile, and some people haven't started yet. It's interesting. Even IBM on their Db2 on Z development is now using Agile and sprints, delivering function levels, as it were, instead of versions of their product, which is also interesting to see. So we'll close that off, go back to our presentation over here, and the next thing I need to do is to switch slide decks and go over to my presentation deck for today. And as always, the replays will be available on the DBA replay blog, and the slides will also be there. I took the IDUG logo off some of my things. This presentation was originally to be given in Dallas, but unfortunately Dallas turned into a virtual-only conference. I did present this as well for the IBM User Community Days in the middle of last month. And this presentation has also been accepted for IDUG in Edinburgh. We'll also have to see whether IDUG in Edinburgh happens, but for now it's scheduled, and I look forward to going back to Scotland. It's always fun over there. So with that, let's move along. I'm trying to make sure we get through in good time today. The weather outside is just too nice to be inside. So let's move this forward. My agenda today is to talk a little bit about the history and why I chose the title of Data Pioneer. And the purpose of this presentation really is I go into Small organizations, sometimes they have a great idea for a product and they start using it, and they've used DB2 as their database. And they get to a point where the project is going well, things have gotten better, continue to move along, and all of a sudden they hire themselves a DBA, and the DBA has to come in after the fact and put things in place to allow them to continue to be successful as they move forward. The first person doing that, I'm calling the data pioneer. You have to introduce the concepts of data management to the developers that have been working on this product. So, a little bit about me before we start. It's interesting to go back and update this from time to time. I started working with DB2 on Z in 1985. Back then, when I started, it was MVS 370. We didn't have MVS XA installed in the particular shop I was in. I was also involved with some user group activities, so I started teaching in September of 1987. Back then, 2 years experience with DB2 was considered a lot of experience. When IBM moved their development lab to Toronto in 1993, I thought it would be a great thing to have home court advantage on other people. So I immediately went off and got DB2 on OS2 and started learning that at home. Started doing my first teaching of DB2 LUW in 1995. Over the years, through IDUG and through other business contacts, I've been to 32 countries doing DB2 work, 37 states, if you'd like to count those. Those are the things that I like to work on: performance design, administration, and helping customers migrate things around, either mostly on to DB2 LUW. Other things about me: industry involvement. I've been an IBM Gold consultant since the program started in 1994. IBM champion since 2008. I, of course, host this show. I was involved with Guide International, which is the US version of a conference they still run in Europe called Guide Share. I was involved with that for 9 years, and I also spoke at the very first IDUG conference in 1989. And over the years in various locations, I've given at least 60 IDUG presentations. I'd have to go back and count them all. At some point, maybe I'll do that, but it's probably safe just to say over 60 and leave it there for now. I've also been involved with the local user group, and I'm on various technical advisory boards and customer advisory councils for both DB2Z and LUW, and I'm also on the IBM DB2 LUW SAP Technical Leadership Exchange. I've been doing that for about 10 years. Now let's get on and talk about data pioneers. The term of what does a pioneer mean? Below here we have a picture of a new farm that you have managed to get. Maybe you have a land grant, or you come to a new country and they say, congratulations, here's the farm we're assigning to you, and you look at your farm, and if you had an aerial shot of this, of course you wouldn't have that in the middle of the 1600s or 1700s, but this is what it would look like. The first thing you got to do before you can plant a crop is to clear the land. And by the way, winter's coming. You might want to build a house. Some people say, oh, wasn't it all prairie land? Not where I live. It was all trees, and it still is today. Find wildlife refuges and other conservation areas where the land is pretty much tree covered around here. It's a lot of work to clear land, but if you did that, and there was a period even up to 50 years ago, you might even be able to do it today. If you're willing to clear the land, you can get some free land from the government, provided you clear the land, put a house on it, and then essentially establish a homestead for yourself. So this is what a data pioneer, this is what original pioneers had to do. You have no services. Perhaps surveyors have been through to lay out the land allotments. Roads perhaps are planned, but not yet built. There's no other infrastructure. If you have a fire, you're on your own. So there might be a sheriff, but you're on your own again. You have to be self-sufficient. You have to write your own tools or what you can make should you need tools. And there are many problems to be solved, both known and unknown. As you get more experience, you'll have ability to solve those problems. So when you start from scratch, you have to do everything yourself. In the case of data pioneers, you could be in the same position. So let's fast forward to today. We have a new business or division that's started within a large organization, and things are going well. Everybody's happy. There's been great success. Developers have created a new application to support the business. Perhaps it is a software business, and it's a really great application. The salespeople are out selling their ability of what this application does. They worked hard, and they're continuing to work hard. Users and customers are coming on board. It was fine when you first started up and you got your first customer, then your second, third, fourth. Everything's going fine. But when you get to 40 and 50 customers, this is where the need to manage the growth and need to manage your application come into play. And from this point, then you have to decide how you're going to set up a DBA department or the role of the DBA within the organization. So at some point, people realize the data is growing. Things possibly are getting out of control, but certainly it needs to be managed. And management comes up with the idea of hiring a database administrator, and that could be you. Give you an idea of some of the startups we've had to deal with through the years. One is a gas loyalty program in Dallas. And the idea here is when you go into gas pumps, you swipe your rewards card. And as you go along, you gather discounts on gas or other merchandise through the rewards program. That's all stored within the Db2 database. And actually, that's grown to several databases based on the requirements for their customers and how they choose to manage the data. Certainly from a Db2 point of view, they had Db2 Express, and they had several databases in there as they divided up their workload. Another part was a small company that has now been bought out, but originally they were doing the technical analysis for America Online when they were offering stock services. Technical analysis is looking at the curves on increases and decreases in stock price and providing that information to customers. It went along quite smoothly using a Db2 database. Life was good. And we have a current one we're working with. It's a company using machine learning and AI and all of these nice new words that people like to use, and they're using their application, the knowledge that they have on this stuff to handle health insurance fraud and looking for health insurance. Also, weekly grocery flyers. We get an awful lot of these in the Toronto area. I get every Thursday I get a supply of flyers in, and the purpose of their analysis is to identify products that people would normally buy together. And one of the things they're trying to do is make sure that only one product that people would buy would be on sale at a time, such that, for example, if you're putting spaghetti sauce on sale, you don't put the noodles on in the same week, so that you get somebody who would buy something on sale, but the other complementary products would not be on sale, so that you drive business in a productive way in terms of revenue. And the last thing they've got is a special questionnaire that they're working with another startup on, working as a joint venture where they're going through and looking at brain injuries. And, they have an algorithm. They bring in all sorts of data from the customers. And when they first started up, it sounded great, but they're also suffering through some growing pains as they get competitors in the health insurance business, and they have to make sure that their data of each customer is secured correctly away from other companies. So now, as the data pioneer, you start up. There's possibly anywhere between 20 to 40 developers that have already had a chance to get ahead of you, and we have to then look and see what you have to do in order to catch up and get things under control. The DevOps are still working quickly. They've got schedules to meet. They've got customizations many cases where they put in small things that are different for each customer. They have to manage each version of that. And they're also introducing new features as well. So they've got a lot of work ahead of them. And meanwhile, you have to find a way to control what they're doing with the database. And the developer priorities are mainly functionality for the user requirements as things come through. They also want to get things done quickly. They're using DevOps, Agile, they've got sprints going, they want to work smart, and they want to work quickly. Now, working smart is what they have in mind. Sometimes when you look at what they do, you might say, well, I guess that could be smarter. But having said that, they are smart people and they're trying to work quickly. So as you start as a DBA and you're looking to see what they're doing, you might need to provide education on efficient SQL. You also have to worry whether or not when they do something, if, for example, they're doing mass loads of data from another source, you have to ensure that integrity is not sacrificed while they're looking for the fastest way to do things. We'll talk more about that as we go through. On the other side, as you come in as a DBA, your priorities are slightly different. First thing is to ensure that the database remains available, and you want to protect the data that's there. You have to support the developers. That can involve data loads and SQL support. And you also have to make sure that performance is optimal as well. However, the first option here on data integrity has to be addressed before you look at performance. So looking at the data priorities and introducing those to developers, first thing that you have to realize is the delivery clock is always running. There's always new functions to be built, new customers with new function and contracts. Is often something that can happen. And this, as I say, this can happen in a small startup, but it can also start in a new division of a company where you may or may not be part of the IT organization if you join this organization, because IT is not yet aware of it and things have gotten away, perhaps gone quicker than anyone imagined. Then you have to go back and introduce data and other controls that the IT department might want you to have. So the challenge then is, how can you introduce data integrity with a minimal impact on development schedules? You just have to sell the idea of data integrity to developers. Selling integrity to management developers, what's the level of availability you require? What's the cost per minute of an outage for a web application? How large is your batch window? How long does it take for the largest batch job to run? So in a situation where you say the system has to be available for 18 hours a day, or in many cases these days 24 hours a day, and you have batch jobs that have to run, data loads and these sort of things, and if that fails and you have to restart, possibly restore a database, how long can you afford to be out of business? Also, if you really bugger things up, that's a technical term, bugger, can you afford to lose a customer? You managed to mess things up so badly that you're going to be out of business for some period of time. Can you afford to lose a customer? If management says, yeah, we can afford to lose a customer, you might say, okay, we can do this in a cheaper way. But what you find in most cases is that nobody wants to lose a customer, particularly in a startup operation. And then you have to look at what's the cost of data that becomes unrecoverable. What steps do you take to ensure that if recoverability is important, what steps are you willing to take and what price are you willing to pay for this? I did some work with a major auto parts retailer. They phoned up one day because a new DBA had come in and they were cleaning up the log directory, and they compressed all of the logs within the Db2 log directory. So when Db2 went to start up, it's going through its normal checks, and it finds that there are no logs available to be read in that system because they were all compressed. Now they're gzip logs or whatever. the database became marked non-recoverable, broken. Their problem was based on a couple of other things. They didn't have a backup that really was current for the last 3 weeks. So at this point, this is an internal application. It's certainly not a pioneering situation, but now they've got a situation where the data is not available and their operational data store and their other work they're doing, the merchandising analysis, is not available based on a rookie mistake. And people have to understand how that occurred, the cost of it, and understand what they're willing to do to ensure that it doesn't happen again. So what's the maximum length of an outage before there's severe impact on the business? From a financial point of view, what's your maximum acceptable recovery time? You can look at various aspects of this based on the type of business you're in, whether it's company business, production capacity, personnel downtime, or the value of the lost data. And by the way, anything that has a price tag associated with it is by definition a management decision. So if you say this is going to cost money, this is going to cost time, management has to know about that and be able to make a call on that. Now, going back through this, if you've got a bunch of developers who've had a head start on you, they might not understand data integrity. They might not even understand where the backup is. So this is one of the first things that I look at when I'm starting with the developers. Am I in a situation that if the worst thing happened right now, am I in a situation where I can't recover? If the answer is no, the first thing I'm going to do is look at taking it back. But we'll talk through the various components of data integrity on our next slide. But the users themselves don't concern themselves with data integrity. They always assume that you know what you're doing until there's a problem and you find out that data has been damaged in some way. So you need to get your developers to work with DBA to ensure that application and data integrity exists. Now, Db2 has many facilities built in, such as various utilities for backup recovery, various other facilities that help with blocking and other things like that, but they need to be used properly. We'll talk about that in just a minute as well. So the integrity components, I've broken it down into 5. First one is data validation, then security. With data validation, of course, this is ensuring that your data is correct. There's not no duplicate customer records in there. There's no data out of bounds. All of the sort of things that you would do to ensure that the data itself retains its meaning. Of course, that's a very large and great topic. Security, of course, is preventing unauthorized access to data. That's the first thing we go through. And the possible control by application function, and also making sure that authorized users have a way of having ease of safe use, meaning that it's easy for them to do their job correctly. The next one, of course, is the big one for DBA, is recovery. This is the ability to recover from any type of system or application failure. That often these days, hardware breaks a lot less than it used to. So what happens is if there's an application failure, you might need to go back and do some point-in-time recovery. We also have off-site recovery in the case of the data center becoming unavailable. We've been talking about those for years, but these are things that need to be introduced and talked about with management. Next one is operability. The procedures you use for the routine operation and maintenance of a database and building those into installation standards. Complex procedures lead to higher operating costs and potential for errors. We had something that occurred with one of the major banks up here in Canada, and it turns out to be our bank. And what happened is there was a change management issue where somebody moved some untested code into production, and it literally took out their branch banking system for 3 days. In fact, the other people on the board of directors had somebody against the CIO, but they ultimately ended up firing the CIO because somebody had a change management issue. It's rather amusing how this was reported in the press at the time. The way it was reported or read in the press was somebody had entered a bad code. So it sounds like somebody sat down at a keyboard and did something that caused an entire system to crash. But it was really a change management issue. But it's really interesting when people get into imagining what a problem is. But on the whole, it really came down to operations and ensuring that procedures are done correctly. And the last thing, of course, is concurrency. And this is the idea of losing no updates during concurrent processes for updates. Two people are trying to update the same customer at the same time, that one will wait slightly and work correctly. So here's the DBA areas of interest. Day one, if you're the first DBA involved, one, make sure that things are backed up and it's possible to recover the database should something terrible happen. The next thing is to start looking at naming standards, security, the sorts of things that will help you standardize the job of managing data such that your developers can get on with their job. Data movement, possibly splitting the database, that sort of thing, developer practices, ensuring data quality, etc. So taking that list, I'll talk through it and explain why I have that list the way it does. On your first day, the one-time activities that you'll want to start doing. One is to make sure there's a backup if there are none, and ensuring that that backup is taken correctly. One thing is a backup is great to have, but you also have to look at the other practices that the developers might be doing that might be detrimental to proper recovery. One of them, I noticed in one shop, is they always, when they're doing data loads, they were doing it via inserts, but they were using not logged initially because they just wanted it to run fast. Yes, it runs fast if you have no logging, but if you're taking backups once a week and you have not logged activity, that means that none of your other backups will work unless you have an offline backup. For example, if you take an offline backup once a week, that's the only backup you're going to have if they're not logged operations. The next thing is to come up with naming standards. As I said initially, you go in and you find that health insurance fraud, this database is really important, and there's 5 good customers in there, and all of their data has names within the database, but itself there's many things wrong with storing various customers together. So coming up with naming standards so that you can break that out later is something that is of interest to you. There are various suggestions on what's available. The big problem with naming standards is that you only get 8 characters for a database still, and so you have to come up with a meaningful way of coming up with those names. Look at the security framework. Ensure that data is encrypted as it goes on the network and as well as being at rest. If you have a security department, well, you might not. A small startup, they likely have not gotten around to having somebody who's got the title of security administrator. They've just hired you as a DBA, but it's also important to know that overall security is in place in addition to the security around the database. And all of these can be adjusted as the business grows. The other thing you want to do is to automate things as quickly as possible so that you're not doing things that could be done for you by DB2 or by some scripts that you easily write. DB2 LUW DBA has to be prepared to develop and maintain scripts that make your job easier. Most of the DBAs I've worked with on DB2 LUW are supporting a minimum of 15 to 20 databases, and sometimes much more than that, up to upwards of 100 databases. It's not completely unordinary. So we have things for backup, run stats, and by the way, the data, DB2 has things that will do this for you automatically. However, most people have jobs set up in cron to do this. Performance reporting, data loads, and migration. Again, another thing where it's easily automated with stored procedures. The other thing you want to be able to do and have confidence that you can do it easily is redirected restores, where you take a backup and you need to move to a new machine. We went into one customer and they had spent a tremendous amount of money on a very large machine. All of these SSD drives, solid state and everything, but when you look at it, the solid state technology has been around for a good 10 years or more now, and the machine itself was 10 years old, and they say, well, it's been a great machine, but mean time to failure is staring us in the face, so we need to take our databases and move those off to different machines and perhaps split it up a little better. Now, in terms of scripts, the obvious one, if you're a Unix shop or Linux, is to use cron. If you're a Windows shop, or for some reason the cron is not necessarily available to you, a small shop, if you have that problem, that generally points to some political issues, but for a Unix shop. But there's a feature available of DB2 which is relatively not talked about very much, but it's called the Administrative Task Scheduler, or the ATS. It started becoming available in and around Db2 9.7, and it uses cron-like scheduling things, and it makes it easy to either run utilities or stored procedures. So as soon as you put something in a stored procedure can call other stored procedures. So you can basically build everything that you want to run through the ATS or through cron that you would want to do, whether that's your nightly batch runs or your daily or weekly utility runs. And anything else that you need to do on a periodic basis, such as data loads and migrations. So looking at key activities, your backup strategy will determine how you're able to recover. So you have to ensure that backups work. When I say backups that work, there's a Db2 check backup utility that you can run to make sure that the backup is actually going to work correctly. Back in my early days in mainframes, anybody that took a backup of anything, the data center manager, one of them got into the habit of always copying any backup that was taken and to another tape. And basically, if you could read the backup you just took to make a copy of it, then that tape that was just read is now considered a workable backup. It actually can be read and it does work correctly. Believe it or not, there's people out there that are taking backups on a regular basis, and for some reason, the backup's not being taken correctly, and as such, if the backup has never been read, there's no guarantee that it'll actually do what you need to do. As I mentioned earlier, hardware failure seems to happen a lot less, but when you do have a hardware failure, typically you're looking to recover as close as possible to the point of failure, recover current. Applications or software failures where somebody has input an input file twice, so that you have duplicate updates or inserts that you want to remove. It generally means you end up going back to a point in time before the failure, or before the action that caused that. And that's true for anything, or most things that are application or software related. And disaster recovery, of course, is making sure that you can recover a system off-site. These days, that could be, you could have a disaster recovery plan, which involves running from the Amazon cloud or the IBM cloud. That might be acceptable to you. But an untested recovery scenario is not really something that you can count on. You must regularly test your recovery scenarios. Failure to recover in a production environment is never considered acceptable. One last comment on that before we move on. Recovery in database work is very similar to what my first aid training was. I worked for a big insurance company back a long time ago. They made first aid training available to every employee. You could literally, they regularly encouraged you to go on first aid training. That could be anything from sealing up wounds or handling broken arms and this sort of thing. And they also had a second course that followed on, which was a course on CPR. At the time, when I took the CPR class, even with the first aid training, they said, you've taken a course in first aid. You are now certified as a first aider, if I can use that term, for the next 3 years. In the case of the CPR class, it was much more involved. You had practice dummies and all sorts of things to work on. At the end of the first aid training, they said, you're now certified for 1 year, meaning that if you want to continue to be certified as a person offering CPR, you have to be going back and taking the course every year to get any updates and to practice on doing this. Same thing's true with database recovery. You can have all the backups in the world, but if you've never practiced taking your backups, done a recovery with those, then in some regards, you're not yet certified to recover in your environment. Getting people used to the idea of doing regular tests on recovery, this is something that's really important. Looking at naming standards. Standards are important for communicating and understanding what's going on, and also for automation. The database names are still limited to 8 characters, but you can have other names for tables and views within your database. Mainly those would be the ones you consider and other table spaces and these sort of things as well. But you might have to identify the list of things listed there. Certainly you want to be able to identify a customer application, and then you get down into versioning what versions you have. Some people really think that in identifying the correct version of a database is really important, so they want to use multiple characters instead of just a P or a T on the version. That situation where somebody has made some pretty significant bad errors, sort of good error, really bad stuff where they thought they were in test and it turned out they were in a production database. So these are things to watch out for. I know some people, when they're using putty sessions, that they literally have a different color for tested production as a background color. So when they're in production, they know it's a different color. That should tweak that they're doing something that's a little different or perhaps more important than working in a test database. With security, things are getting easier in Db2 11.5 because in setting up authentication, you need to separate production from test normally, and ensuring that customers are separated from each other, possibly on different machines or at least in separate databases. In 11.5, it becomes easy to encrypt data at rest and using the key store and other such things. Again, it takes some practice to know how things are going to recover when you're using encrypted data and having to move that to another machine should there be a hardware failure or something like that. Also, encrypting data movement as well, something that you should look into. So when I talk about data movement, we went in and we found that everything that in one customer was using a single database with a whole bunch of different customers, both development and production and testing, was all done on the one platform. So we ended up having to quickly identify various testing levels in production and start moving things apart. Of course, the other thing we did is we started separating customers as to encrypt the data. One particular case where they're bringing customers are sending them files of data, at some point their audit department might come by and say things such as, are you protecting our data the way we would as if it was in our own shop? And the answer has to be, yes, we're doing this correctly. Now, in licensing splitting databases, one of the things we work with, particularly with customers, for developer databases and to ensure that sizes are managed such that you can use the Db2 free versions in 11.5. Database size is simply 100 gigabytes. That's compressed, so if we can have people use their test environments in such a way that they stay under the 100 gigabyte limit, they can keep their development costs down. You have to, of course, there can be growth, but the other idea of naming standards and scripting is we want to be able to automate builds and deployments of new environments. This can be base builds of the Db2 software with base builds and various standard options that we want to use across Db2 along with the various response files. We also want to be able to track within the application itself in the database change analysis and version tracking. So if a new feature comes in for a customer that'll be implemented next, we've got to be able to track that. So everything gets automated. With naming standards and patterns, make this easier to do. Things that we have to deal with developers as DBAs. Ideas that often seem to escape developers, and they're busy more working on application function than they are on integrity. We need to help them with the understanding of units of work. Where do commits go? If you're processing more than one business transaction in a batch program, for example, or you're adding things in where you need to do commits, where do they go in an application such that data integrity is maintained? Also helping developers with understanding concurrency and the ideas of optimistic or pessimistic locking. Optimistic locking is using the row change timestamp type of technology, which is built in. Many older applications simply wrote their own timestamp, but now there's a data type in Db2 called a row change timestamp, and you basically check that before you do an update to ensure that no one else has changed the row. That's the optimistic one, which is basically saying, I'm assuming that this doesn't the data hasn't changed, but I'm going to check. There's another one, which is the pessimistic locking, where you set up a locking table. It has a number of other issues that come into play with pessimistic locking, because if the locking table does not get cleaned up at the end of the transaction, including that various parts of the data, various rows in the database are locked. The last thing to work on that I've listed here is this idea of efficient SQL and other facilities. One that constantly comes up is the idea of multi-row inserts and fetch, the idea of reducing the amount of SQL demand on the database by bringing back multiple rows at one time or inserting multiple rows in a single operation. This is what I want to say. It's newer. In some regards it is, but it's been around still. Everything in Db2 seems to have been around for years. Multi-row inserts and fetch have been around for at least 10 years, if not 15 years. Looking back. But it's still concepts that they need to sometimes be introduced to or reminded that they exist. The other thing in dealing with developers, this came off a SQL Server website. This is a developer having to talk to a DBA, and yes, this dates back to about 2012. It was on a guy's website called Thomas LaRock, and this is the survival tips for developers, how to talk to your DBA. The dangerous things are over here on the left, the red, safer, safest, and the ultra safe. You always agree with your DBA. This is a really cute thing to do, but in the world of Agile, if you make life, as a DBA, if you make life difficult for the developers, they will find a way to go around you. And they will just talk about the schedule and the talk of needing to get things done. So if you're a roadblock to their success, they will find a way to ignore you. It's kind of fun. It is meant as a joke, but certainly I've been in places. The worst place I ever saw this happen was a big insurance company in Connecticut, where DBAs were setting up their environment with all of the standards and everything for DB2 on the mainframe. And they made it so hard and so difficult for people to learn DB2 that most of the divisions went Oracle, and I'm not sure that DB2 on the mainframe ever was successful in that company, simply because with the DBA that's hard to work with, they decided just to avoid them altogether and go elsewhere. So in the new world, DevOps has a head start on the DBA. They've got deadlines to meet, sprints are ongoing, and the DBA has to introduce standards that will have a minimal impact on productivity, and you have to be perceived as being part of the solution. I made my point there. So being part of the solution is, hey, how can I can make your code go faster and I can make your development easier. We look at things such as multi-row insert. Yes, they're harder to code, but you've been having trouble with the length of time that the loads are taking, makes the database unavailable to the customers. Let's talk about things that will help do that. Next on my list, I had data quality, which is looking at recoverability, taking and testing backups, developing and testing recovery scenarios, and also including backup and log retention strategies. Some of these things can automatically be built now within the Db2 LUW database config. Participate or initiate offsite recovery planning. An offsite recovery these days doesn't necessarily mean that the computer itself is unavailable. It's, of course, in the COVID-19 world, we've all learned that everybody can work remotely. So if the machine itself becomes unavailable, what else can you do? Integrating DB2 into a corporate security plan if one exists, or in some cases, you might have to get them thinking about what the corporate security plan looks like, and here's what DB2 needs. And also taking advantage of the autonomic maintenance features that are available in DB2, automatic run stats. One of the more frustrating moments we've had with a DBA that was hired into a startup was the first thing this guy was worried about was run stats. He said, hey, you need to take a backup. He goes, oh, but I don't see them taking run stats. And I said, it almost got to the point is we don't give about run stats. Let DB2 do it. What you need to worry about is backup. Ultimately, we ended up working with yet another DBA after that one left. Other things to talk about with your developers and management is the things that wreck your application data integrity. These are things that you should not do. Allowing not logged operations. You can talk to developers first before you change the data. You can change the database configuration to prevent this if you like. Improper use of commit, wrongly identifying units of work, putting intermediate commit points into long-running loads and this sort of thing without the ability to restart. If that falls over, you don't have a way of properly restarting, then you have to go back and restore and rerun from the beginning. Incorrect validation of input data. Yes, we should be catching that during testing, and there's many other facilities you can introduce, from triggers to user-defined functions, all sorts of things that will help you. They're built-in data types, ensuring that people, other checks that you can build into the database that makes coding easier for new applications. And also silly, mundane things we've been talking about for years, but they seem to show up at various startups because the people they hire are so interested in getting the job done, they forget that simple things like SQL injection can cause a major problem for the organization. Making sure that people don't inadvertently set up things such that exposures are possible. Every time there's a major security problem, whether it's personal information, credit card information, it always makes the news. This has happened to major retailers, hotel chains, all sorts of things. Part of me becomes rather reticent. They say, would you like us to save your credit card for future use? Saying no more often these days. Now, all of the things I've been talking about are data integrity related. The last thing I'd like to talk about briefly is performance. People always want good performance. They always, when they put a new system in, they talk about requirements, they talk about functionality, but they always assume that performance is going to be good. I've got it last on my list mainly because if your data is wrong or unavailable, it doesn't matter how fast it goes. Having said that, you will get more brownie points by having good performance. So when we start looking at this, it's generally a given. If the system performs well, then the customer's happy. If it doesn't, then the customer's unhappy. Do performance reporting, set up service level agreements if they're needed, particularly with external customers. And to do performance tuning, this requires the best understanding of the environment itself. Looking at performance activities, we've got data integrity has to come first. The data has to be correct and available, regardless of how fast it is. Performance tuning leads to quick wins. It's nice to do it. If you do this, sometimes I've done so many performance reviews where in a couple of days I can go in and save a customer really money. I can train customers on their performance tuning, and everybody feels good about it. Everybody gets a nice paycheck. And everybody gets a good pat on the back for doing it. Being a performance hero is a wonderful thing to do. Being a recovery hero is much tougher. Recovery heroes means that you can recover a database if something's wrong with it in a quick fashion. But that can take, in some cases, if things are really messed up, I've seen people work 36 hours straight doing the recovery. It's a lot tougher to be a recovery hero than it is to be a performance hero. Security heroes, you never hear about them because if there's never a security problem, you've done your job correctly. If there is a security problem, now you're not a hero. So other things to look at, we database and instance performance tuning, we have buffer pool analysis, various sort parameters, and other configuration parameters to look at. Application performance, we normally try to match indexes to the SQL that people write because occasionally you might have to go back and change SQL, but it's far easier to alter indexes to match the SQL queries that exist. And of course, you might have to work on concurrency issues as well. Daily activities then, production support, making sure the database is available, the overnight scripts ran correctly, and performing database maintenance as needed, resolving reporting on outstanding issues. Then various development coordination as we've talked through, perhaps altering and creating object definitions, and migrating things around. And here are some parameters that deal with routine maintenance. Lock non-logged operations. Turn that on so that people don't get to do not logged initially. Determine the number of database backups you want to maintain. These are the defaults I've listed here on an 11.1 system. The number of ones with an arrow are indicating suggested values as well. How long do you keep your recovery history, for example, and the auto deletion of recovery objects so that they automatically clean themselves up. What other things do you want the database to do? Do you want automatic database backups, or do you want to control that more yourself? Auto run stats, sort of thing. Automatic reorg. And hypothetically do that. I have not yet had the courage to even think about doing that. Monthly activities, these are other things that come up. From status reports, documentation, restores, loads, design reviews, disaster testing, and personal development. And personal development here can be practicing recovery. So, in terms of timing, about on the hour as I'd hope to be. in DevOps, responsiveness is the key. Be part of the solution. Help developers to be more effective. Integrity must be established and maintained, most importantly for recoverability and security. With that, I've finished my presentation. Here we are on the Db2Night show. My little dog has gone to sleep, so I am done. And, with that, I'll look to the question queue. It seems to be rather quiet today, and that's okay. I'll close that one down. I will put up my other slide deck here just to wrap up the show and ask our final polling question, which is, did you learn anything today? Let's launch that question. With that, I'll close that off quickly and share the results. And there are some people that already knew this stuff, and that's great. For other people, we had 88% people that learned something. That's great to see. So thanks for that. And just remind you that today's show was sponsored by DBI and their tools. And again, thanks for attending. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time on the Db2Night show in 2 weeks. If you aren't on the COS show, have a great summer, and we will see you in the fall. Bye-bye.